In our first video on the indigenous people of Africa, we'll study the Mau-mow. The Mau-mow, according to Caroline Boyce Davis, refers to the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, or the Mau-mow. This was a clandestine liberation army that fought for Kenya's independence between 1952 and 1956. Mau-mow is actually an acronym that will come to find its origin as we progress. There exist different perspectives on the origin of the Mau-mow. One of the perspectives was the colonial perspective. The colonial perspective argued that the Mau-mow were named as a colonial propaganda to create the image of a meanliness, depraved band of rugged opportunists with no cause. Essentially, the colonial government wanted to subjugate the Mau-mow and to give meaningless to their movement. Their second perspective is the African perspective. The perspective argues that the movement was started in Rift Valley, in a province of Kenya, around 1947. This is when oathing rituals were first reported in the Olengo-Ruon region. In regards to the origin of the Mau-mow people, nationalist historians have often traced the origin of the Mau-mow to be to the outlawed association called the Kenya African Union. That was paraphrased as KCA. The movement was formed in the late 1940s. Those involved in Mau-mow, which was largely a Kikuyu sensationalist movement, took oaths to eradicate colonial rule. Essentially, the term Mau-mow denotes the taking of oaths. These oaths were said to be bitter herbs, connotations that people did undertake as a sign of allegiance to take back the African land from the white Europeans. The movement at the time was headed by young militants such as Dedan Kimathi, General China. The militants were often faced very horrendous ends. They were hanged. Some of them were shot at. They lived within the Aberdare region where they survived in thickets within the forest. The movement was headed by these young militants who were radical in their ideals. They were referred to as the Land Freedom Army. They used weapons that today can be found in the Kenya National Museum. Due to the increasing violent acts, such as arson, the maiming of cattle, the assassination of figures who collaborated, such as Senior Chief Warohio, the leading supporter of the government policies in the Kikuyu country, the British declared a state of emergency in 1952 against the Mau-mow. A question is often posited. How did the Mau-mow lead to the Kenyan independence in 1963? Essentially, they undermined white supremacy and legitimacy. How did they undermine white supremacy and legitimacy? At first, there was a perception that the white race was infallible. White supremacy essentially was a doctrine of that the white colonialists were superior, which justified their discrimination, segregation, and domination of persons of color based on an ideology of supremacy. White supremacy essentially led to structural indifference, where Africans had demarcated territory. We had concepts such as Africans could only live within reserves. These reserves, Africans couldn't plant crops of their choice since they had to support the colonial economy, which essentially made to support only the white interest. The Mau-mow essentially were angered by that regime. Essentially, the Mau-mow felt empowered after the Second World War, where they had been drafted to the Kenyan African Rifles, where they fought on the sides of the Allied powers during Second World War. Therefore, they felt that if the white man could be injured by the German weapons, why not take up arms back in their own country and attack the white man? Therefore, they felt that there was a need to undermine white supremacy and legitimacy. Secondly, the Mau-mow sapped financial reserves of the white imperialists within the Kenyan territory. The financial impact of the Mau-mow was an uprising that was tremendous. The Mau-mow put up protracted campaigns, often guerrilla in nature, that sapped British supplies and reserves. The British were forced to spend massive sums of money in deforesting, leveling hills to hunt down the insurgents. The British were back-footed within their own colonial territory. As such, the lackluster economy suffered from the consequences of the Second World War. The economy was not self-sufficient. It relied from capital from London. So essentially, the insurgency sapped resources from the British. This led to the decline of the colonial rule in Kenya. Thirdly, the MOW-mow did force constitutional change. Essentially, the MOW-mow backed people who wanted to seek political power within the territory. This led to changes such as the Letterton and the Lennox-Boyd Constitution in Kenya. The constitutions were adapted in the territory to promote a degree of multifaceted nationalists, where the Indians within the territory sought political power within the territory, where the Africans were now under the Devonshire White Paper. They were now, Kenya as a territory was seen as an African territory. Therefore, the MOW-mow did indeed push for constitutional changes. Under the Letterton Constitution of 1954, a Council of Ministers was created with 6 official members from the civil service, 2 nominated members, and 6 unofficial members, all appointed by the governor. The 6 unofficial members were appointed from elected members, 3 of them who were European, 2 were Asian, and 1 was African. The Lennox-Boyd Constitution provided for 6 African elected members of the Legislative Council, bringing the total to 14. That is the same number as the elected Europeans. All other races in Kenya began to feel a degree of liberation. The Lennox-Boyd was pushed by Lennox-Boyd. However, as was noted later by scholars, it did not really create a degree of equality, since the whites still held a degree of power within the territory. The MOW-mow did subvert British plans. At first, independence was seen as a guarantee to be in the late 1970s. The British had planned that Kenya remain under their dominion to later years. But MOW-mow uprising mobilized and marshaled the agrarian sectors, shaping the political awareness and economic thinking within the territory. This allowed Kenya to become a free society with internal rule. This was attributed to the rigorous movements that undermined British sovereign status within the territory. The MOW-mow actions, furthermore, undermined British unity while empowering the ethnic groups within the territory. The MOW-mow freedom fighters' cries led to the people of the different territories, the different segments within Kenya, to want to unite and coalesce under one flag. At first, the movement was mainly made up of the Agikuyu and Luo. They were disgruntled, especially owing to the treatment of KCA essentially. The British brought together the Bukusu, Maragoli, Banyala, Banyore, and other ethnic groups within the territory that collaborated to fight the radical resistors. In short, this brought the different ethnic groups together to fight for a common destiny. Essentially, at the end of the day, the MOW-mow efforts led to independence. That is in June 1963. And in December, Kenyatta became the Prime Minister in Kenya. And in the monarch's constitutional roles were mostly delegated to the Governor General in Kenya. That was Malcolm John MacDonald. The Republic of Kenya came into existence in 12th December 1964. Essentially, the MOW-mow did achieve their goal at the end of the day, and Kenya did become an independent country. The MOW-mow, in summation, did put up a good fight against the Imperial British Empire. And indeed, we can say their efforts were not in vain. Thank you for watching our content. Remember to like, subscribe, to get to understand the different indigenous groups within Africa and the role that they played toward independence. Thank you.